For nearly 50 years, the Franks were considered invincible. They had seized Jerusalem. Godfrey established the legend. Bohemond carved out a principality for himself. And Baldwin I built it all into a wealthy maritime state. They seemed like a divine punishment, a force that was impossible to stop. But what if I told you that the man who would deal them the first crushing blow and prove that they were vulnerable was not a holy warrior? What if I told you he wasn't obsessed with jihad, that the Crusaders interested him very little? His name was Imad ad-Din Zengi, and he emerged as a cruel, pragmatic, and ruthless tyrant who spent the vast majority of his life fighting against other Muslims. For him, the Crusaders were merely one of many pieces on the chessboard, nothing more than an annoying nuisance. This is the story of how the Islamic world, fragmented and at war with itself, was united not by a preacher, but by a dictator. Today, you will learn: how did Zengi, the son of an executed traitor, manage to claw his way from hostage to ruler? Why was he far more interested in seizing Muslim Damascus than Christian Jerusalem? What were his terrifying disciplinary tactics for which he would crucify his own soldiers? How did one fatal mistake by the ruler of Edessa, Joscelin II, literally hand Zengi his greatest victory? And what ridiculous accident involving a jug of wine led to the death of the man who ignited the fire of holy war? We have spent 4 episodes looking at this world through the eyes of the Crusaders. It is time to flip the camera. This is not simply the biography of a warlord. This is the story of how the East awakened and how the blow Zengi struck against Edessa became the stone that triggered the avalanche, which would ultimately bury all the Crusader states beneath it. To understand Zengi, you need to understand the world he grew up in. This was not a unified Islamic world. It was chaos. Dozens of petty emirs, atabegs, and sultans fighting one another for scraps of the disintegrating Seljuk Empire. When the Franks captured Jerusalem, the Muslim leaders of Syria and Iraq were too busy with civil war to even notice. Imad ad-Din Zengi appeared as the flesh and blood of this chaos. His father, Ak-Sonkur, was the powerful emir of Aleppo, but he was executed for treason against his sultan when Zengi was only 10 years old. The boy didn't just lose a father, he lost everything. He became a hostage. He grew up at the court of the Seljuk emir in Mosul, observing a world where today's ally is tomorrow's executioner. He likely looked upon these eternally scheming emirs and learned one single lesson: trust no one. Power is not something given by right. It is something taken by force. And here is the first turning point: his ascent. We transport ourselves to the year 1127. Zengi is already 40 years old. Across Syria, Bohemond II and Baldwin II are warring, strengthening their states. At this time, in Baghdad, the latest atabeg of Mosul dies. Sultan Mahmud II, remembering Zengi as a loyal and brutal soldier, makes a fatal mistake. He thinks that Zengi, the son of a traitor, will be eternally grateful to him. He appoints Zengi as the atabeg of Mosul. Now let's analyze the situation. The Sultan thought he was placing a puppet on the throne, but he had released a tiger. The very second Zengi received power over Mosul, he ceased obeying anyone. His first target was not the Franks in Jerusalem. His first target was his closest competitor, the wealthy and strategically vital city of Aleppo. He did not intend to ignite a jihad. He intended to build his own empire, and Aleppo was its cornerstone. He looked at the map and saw not the Holy Land, but two key nodes, Mosul in Iraq and Aleppo in Syria. Whoever controlled both controlled the entire region. For him, the Crusaders were merely neighbors, enemies just the same as the emirs of Damascus or Baghdad, and far from the most important ones. Zengi had become the Atabeg of Mosul, but Aleppo, the second key to Syria, did not belong to him. The city was in chaos, ruled by weak emirs who were terrified by his reputation, that they even tried to conclude an alliance with the Crusaders just to defend themselves against him. This did not stop Zengi. In 1128, he arrived at the walls of Aleppo, but he did not lay siege to it. Sieges are long, expensive, and risky. Zengi was a master of a different weapon: fear. He began negotiations. He promised, he swore oaths, he guaranteed the safety of the citizens, and the terrified townspeople simply opened the gates to him. That very same night, he broke every oath and established a regime of terror in the city, the likes of which Syria had never seen. It was precisely here, in Aleppo, that he would demonstrate how he intended to unite the Islamic world, not with faith, but with iron. Zengi had seized Aleppo simply by walking through open gates. Now he controlled both Mosul and Aleppo. He had become the most powerful man in Syria. But his empire was built on betrayal and held together by fear. He knew this, and he intended to use fear as his primary instrument of governance. He immediately established a regime of iron discipline in Aleppo. His army, unlike the armies of other emirs, did not pillage the population. Why? Because Zengi executed men for the slightest infraction. Chroniclers of the time, even those who praised him, write of his cruelty with a shudder. He was known for crucifying his own soldiers for theft or drunkenness. He created an army that feared him more than any enemy. This was his method. He was uniting the Islamic world not through a shared faith, but through a shared terror of him. And here is the second turning point: his obsession. Having secured Aleppo, Zengi does not look toward Jerusalem, he looks south, toward the richest Muslim city, Damascus. He becomes obsessed with Damascus. It wasn't just a city, it was a symbol. He who possessed Damascus, Mosul, and Aleppo became the new sultan. The Crusaders were merely an obstacle on the path to this grand goal. We see what his policy was. For years, he wars not with the Franks, he wars with Damascus. He besieges it, he makes alliances with it, he betrays those alliances. The emirs of Damascus were in such terror of Zengi that they did the unthinkable. They, Muslims, concluded a military alliance with the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Now, let's analyze this moment. Think about this paradox. The future hero of Jihad is warring against a Muslim city, and this Muslim city is being defended by Crusader knights. This proves that for Zengi, Jihad in the form we imagine it did not exist. There was only politics, there was only power. He was so focused on Damascus that he practically ignored the Crusader state on his flank, the county of Edessa, the very same one founded by Baldwin I. For Zengi, Edessa was just another petty emirate ruled by Franks. He concluded several truces with them. They were not his priority. And therein lay his greatest blindness, and therein lay his greatest triumph. Zengi spent nearly 15 years in an obsessive struggle for Damascus, and he lost. Damascus, protected by its alliance with Jerusalem, did not submit to him. By 1144,
He was likely furious. His master plan had failed. Meanwhile, in Edessa, Joscelin II was ruling. Unlike his predecessor Baldwin I, Joscelin was a weak, careless, and short-sighted ruler. He watched Zengi warring with Damascus and felt safe. He even concluded an alliance with Zengi's Muslim enemies, believing that the Syrian civil war was his protection. In the autumn of 1144, Joscelin II made one of the most idiotic and fatal mistakes in the history of the Crusades. He received a call for help from one of the emirs who was feuding with Zengi, and Joscelin II, deciding to play at high politics, gathered his entire garrison, his entire army, and marched out of Edessa, leaving the capital of his county completely defenseless.
Zengi was obsessed with Damascus. The Crusaders were a secondary problem to him, just another faction in the Syrian civil war. And at this time, in the county of Edessa, the first state founded by Baldwin I, Joscelin II ruled. He was the complete opposite of Baldwin. Where Baldwin I was pragmatic, ruthless, and an eternally vigilant statesman, Joscelin II was careless, weak, and completely detached from reality. He likely looked at Zengi fighting Damascus and thought it didn't concern him. He believed that the walls of Edessa, built long ago by the Armenians, were impregnable. He lived in luxury in his capital, while his main enemy methodically united Syria. And here is the third turning point. Not an action, but inaction. We see the political map of Syria in the late 1140s. It is a patchwork quilt. Zengi is at war with Damascus. Damascus concludes an alliance with Jerusalem. And what does Joscelin II, the ruler of Edessa, do? Instead of strengthening his borders, he interferes in this war, but not on the side of Jerusalem. He concludes an alliance with other Muslim emirs who were enemies of Zengi. Now, let's break down this situation. Joscelin II did not see a threat of jihad in Zengi. He saw a simple competitor. He was playing the great game of the Syrian emirs, not understanding that he, a Frank, was an outsider in this game. He was so confident in his safety that he moved his residence from Edessa, which was on the front line, to the quieter city of Turbasel, further away from Zengi's borders. Zengi, in turn, had watched this for years. He saw Joscelin's weakness. He saw the ruler of Edessa making alliances with his enemies. To Zengi, Joscelin was not a warrior of Christ. He was just another petty emir who inconveniently got underfoot and supported his rivals. Edessa was not a sacred goal for Zengi. It was simply an irritant, and, as it turned out, a very convenient, unprotected target. Zengi was in a rage. His campaign against Damascus had failed once again. His Muslim enemies had slipped away from him yet again. And then, in the autumn of 1144, his spies brought him incredible news. Joscelin II, the ruler of Edessa, had done the unthinkable. He decided to help his ally, a Muslim emir from Diyarbakir, who was fighting against Zengi. And to do this, he took his entire army, the entire garrison, and left Edessa, abandoning the capital without protection. Zengi likely could not believe his ears. The city that Baldwin I had captured with such difficulty, the capital of the first Crusader state, it had simply been abandoned by its ruler? To Zengi, this was a gift. He immediately turned his entire army around. Forgetting about Damascus, he struck at the defenseless target. November 1144. Zengi, having deployed his entire army, approaches the walls of Edessa. He sees before him a capital, a wealthy and powerful city, and he sees that there are almost no soldiers on the walls. Joscelin II, in his fatal miscalculation, had taken the army, leaving the city defenseless. For Zengi,
who for years had unsuccessfully banged his head against the walls of Damascus, this was a gift of fate. He immediately gave the order for a total blockade. And here is the fourth turning point. Not just a battle, but an execution. We transport ourselves beneath the walls of Edessa. The citizens, Armenians and Franks, are in a panic. They defend themselves desperately, knowing there will be no mercy. They send messengers to Joscelin II, begging him to return, but he, realizing his mistake, is afraid to attack Zengi's army. Zengi does not waste time on assaults. He orders his engineers to do what they knew best: dig. Now, let's get into the details. This was not just a siege. It was the methodical, cold-blooded murder of a city. Zengi ordered mining to begin under the northern wall, the Wall of the Hours. Day and night, his sappers dug tunnels, installing wooden supports. They worked for 28 days. Zengi was not in a hurry. He waited. And then, December 24th, 1144, Christmas Eve. Zengi ordered the supports to be set on fire. Fire engulfed the tunnels, the wood burned through, and a giant section of the northern wall of Edessa simply collapsed, burying hundreds of defenders beneath it. Zengi's army flooded into the breach. The massacre began. But even here, Zengi remained a pragmatist. He immediately ordered a halt to the killing, only of the local Armenian Christians. He needed them for the city to continue functioning. But for the Franks, the knights, their wives and children, there was no mercy. They were all slaughtered. It was a shock. For the first time in 50 years, not just a fortress had fallen, a capital had fallen. An entire Crusader state, the very first one, founded by Baldwin I, had been wiped off the map. The irony lay in the fact that Zengi, who was not a fanatic of Jihad, overnight became the main hero of the Islamic world. He did what no emir before him could do. He proved that the Franks were not invincible. Zengi was on top of the world. He was the defender of the faith, a hero whose name was sung from Baghdad to Cairo. The fall of Edessa made him the most powerful and terrifying man in the East. He was likely already planning his next move. Now, with such authority, he could finally take what he had desired his whole life: Damascus. He was invincible. He was at the peak of his power. He had less than 2 years to live. His empire, built on fear and iron, awaited the most ridiculous finale imaginable. His greatest enemy turned out not to be a Crusader king, nor a sultan. His enemy turned out to be a single slave eunuch and a jug of wine.
The greatest victory in Zengi's career appeared, in essence, to be a lucky improvisation. The fall of Edessa, which came as a shock to the Christian world, was for Zengi merely a brilliant exploitation of Joscelin II's fatal mistake. Now that his name was chanted from Baghdad to Cairo, the entire Islamic world expected him to turn his armies around and lead them to Jerusalem. He had all the political capital to declare a total jihad, but he didn't do it. Zengi, true to himself, returned to his main singular passion: war with other Muslims. He once again got involved in complex intrigues, trying to seize lands from his rivals in Iraq. He was a pragmatist to the bone. The victory over Edessa was for him not the beginning of jihad, but simply a lucky move that removed a neighbor allied to his enemies. And here is the fifth, final turning point, an irony worthy of his cruel life. We transport ourselves to September 11th, 146. Less than 2 years have passed since the triumph in Edessa. Zengi is not storming Jerusalem.
He is besieging yet another Muslim fortress. At night, in his tent, he was likely celebrating. Chroniclers write that he was drunk. He catches one of his servants, a eunuch slave named Yarankash, drinking wine from his goblet. Zengi, known for his bestial cruelty, flies into a rage. He screams at the slave and promises that in the morning, as soon as he sobers up, he will execute him. Now, let's analyze the motives. The slave, Yarankash, likely of Frankish origin, knew his master. He knew that Zengi never forgave. He knew that in the morning a torturous death awaited him, perhaps crucifixion. He had nothing to lose. That same night, when the defender of the faith fell asleep, the slave Yarankash took a dagger and stabbed his master to death. The man whom all Syria feared, who united two great cities and crushed a Crusader state, found death in his bed because of a domestic quarrel. His empire, built exclusively on personal animalistic fear of him, collapsed in that very second. The army, learning of his death, immediately scattered. Soldiers looted the treasury. Zengi died, never having realized his dream, the capture of Damascus. But he, without wishing it himself, did something far greater. Zengi's death was pathetic, but the consequences of his life were epical. His empire, built on fear, immediately fractured. His sons, Nur ad-Din and Saif ad-Din, tore at each other's throats, trying to snatch pieces of the inheritance. It seemed that everything had returned to square one. But in Europe, the news of the fall of Edessa, the first Christian state in the East, produced the effect of an exploding bomb. The Pope was horrified. The entire Christian world shuddered. The stone that Zengi threw in 1144 caused an avalanche. In response to the fall of Edessa, Europe assembled the Second Crusade. The world was entering a new phase. The time of lone adventurers had passed. The era of a total war of civilizations was beginning.
Zengi, a ruthless but pragmatic tyrant, spent his life fighting against other Muslims, but accidentally struck the blow that crushed the first Crusader state, Edessa. But the man who ultimately became the greatest hero of the Jihad found death in his bed at the hands of a eunuch slave over a jug of wine. And this showed the awakening of the East began not with faith, but with a pragmatist who was stopped by a ridiculous accident. And although Zengi did not desire a religious jihad, his strike on Edessa triggered an avalanche. In the next cycle, we will see who picks up this banner. His name is Nur ad-Din, the teacher, and he will prepare the ground for the triumph of Saladin. Subscribe, like if Zengi's death shocked you. Comment, could Zengi have taken Jerusalem? Thank you.